Hey everybody, welcome back to an all new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Today's case is going to be a little bit different. So, how do I want to start this? Let me think. So, this is a case and a story that hits close to home because it actually involves a friend of my sister's, a close friend, a former coworker of years, somebody that was very, very close to Amy. All of you guys know Amy, or most of you guys know Amy, my sister. Now, his story hasn't been told a lot because he was very selective on who shared his story. It was aired once on like a Crimes in Orange County type show. I think it's on Oxygen. I can't even remember where that was, but he was very selective of who shared his story, and because it was his to tell, and he wanted it done in a way that was sensitive, that was correct, that just felt like it was told with some dignity, if that makes sense. Now, his name is John, and he has since passed away. And my sister, as I mentioned, was very close with him. And so when we got to talking about cases that we wanted to cover and things that we felt like were important, she said, John's story needs to be shared because it not only brings a highlight as to how badly certain situations can affect people long term, but I know that we'll cover it with justice. I know that we'll cover it with dignity, respect. So she's actually going to jump on at the end of this video because I want you guys to hear directly from her how this affected him, how he impacted her life, those around him, and just hear directly. I even had considered having her do this entire episode. If you know Amy, you know that she already is a highly emotional person, so it just wasn't going to work. There's no way, which makes sense. I wouldn't be able to necessarily cover a good friend of mine's case without having to edit it a million times. But anyway, long story short, she is going to jump on at the end because I think it is important for you guys to hear from her. Now, with that being said, I also want to say that a lot of the time when I do these episodes, I will start out by talking about how sweet the victim was, how loved the victim was. And I'm not talking about her friend here, but you'll understand as I get going. And I talk about how everybody loved this person, right? How great they were. And also how everybody missed them when they were gone. But today, things are going to be a little bit different because the victim, one of the victims, was quite frankly a massive, massive jerk. It doesn't mean that he deserved what happened to him, not at all. Nobody deserves to get murdered. And we can acknowledge that a person had flaws without casting blame on them or holding back, on the sympathy that we have for them and their families. But still, it's important to be honest about these kinds of people that we talk about, especially when these personal flaws and problems that they have end up being a problem for the police trying to solve their murders. In today's case, the police had a ton of possible suspects and theories about what happened to the murder victim because so many people hated him. And so many people, quite frankly, had a motive to want him dead. But the actual solution was extremely twisted and honestly came completely out of left field. So I know I'm talking a little bit crazy and you're like, okay, Annie, I can't make heads or tails out of anything that you're saying. So let me just jump right in. Whenever I'm getting ready to come in and record, I feel like my final step of my routine is always my fragrance. And it really depends what mood I'm in that day of which fragrance I'm going to wear. But it always is my final little spritz will form out the door and it's like my final step. Now, I've always thought that it was really fascinating that our smell is directly connected with different memories. For me, I know anytime I smell Clinique, I automatically think of my mom. Anytime I smell Vanilla Fields, I think of myself in middle school. So I always go back and forth with what fragrance I want to wear. I can never really decide. I've never had a signature scent either, and that is why I love Scentbird so much. With Scentbird, you can try all sorts of different fragrances, whether you are testing them out to find your staple scent, or you just like to switch it up like me, and you don't have to commit to the full-size bottles. I got 3 new fragrances this month, and let me just show them to you because I am absolutely obsessed. First, I got Juicy Couture La Juicy Noir. Now, what I love about this is it has hints of vanilla, gardenia. It smells so florally, so feminine. And with Scentbird, they always send you these insert cards, which not only tell you about the fragrance, but they also show you all the different notes within the fragrance. So I love seeing that. Now, I'm usually strictly a floral girl. I like kind of that feminine energy. However, what I also tried this month was Ormond Jane Damask. And let me just tell you, this one is so good for date night because it has hits of musk, pear. It is like perfect. And also look at the case that it comes in. It is so sleek, so I can take it anywhere. I throw it in my purse, my pockets, my car, wherever I am. And this right here is a full 30-day supply. So you can test it out for a month. You can switch them up. There's no need to commit to a full-size bottle that can sometimes be anywhere from $200 to $300 to $500. It totally takes the risk out. And it's not just random fragrances that you can choose. They have designer ones like Versace, Dolce & Gabbana, Prada, and of course other brands like Clinique and Juicy Couture. And you can choose whichever ones you want. And you can try your first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8. And then your next month will only be $16.95. So if you're interested in trying Scentbird, use my code AnnieElise2 or the link below, or scan my QR code and get 55% off Scentbird. You can get the product for half the price, just $8. That is a steal. So definitely check it out. Remember, code AnnieElise2 for 55% off. On May 8th, 1996, John Tyler Hancock Sr. was 49 years old and lived in a very safe, high-end neighborhood in California in Orange County. But even before then, he grew up in a very super wealthy family. Now, supposedly, he was a direct descendant of the first person to sign the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock himself, hence the name Hancock. But that wasn't why John's family was so wealthy and so rich. His father had started a company called Modern Hancock Industries. He invented a portable film splicing machine, which is actually a tool that's used to join pieces of film together, kind of like in filmmaking when you're making movies. It was smaller than most film splicing machines that are on the market, so people could actually carry it with them. Plus, it could piece together larger pieces of film. It was an invention that basically transformed filmmaking in Hollywood, and it also made this family incredibly wealthy. They accumulated a lot of wealth. So John grew up in the suburbs of LA, where he was popular, handsome, and of course, incredibly rich. He was also clean-cut and all-American looking with this reddish hair that he kept short, round rosy cheeks, dark eyes, an athletic build, and he was always smiling. So basically, in short, he had a pretty charmed life. But even from the time that he was very young, John wanted more. He was always talking about the big goals that he had for his life. He wanted the typical dream. A big house, a successful career, and a beautiful wife and children. He wanted it all. And he seemed to be well on his way to making some of those dreams come true when he started dating his classmate, Karen. Karen was completely head over heels in love with John. She always pictured herself marrying somebody driven, somebody passionate, so they seemed like a natural fit together. One day after they graduated from high school, John made plans to go on a date with Karen like usual. He went over to her house to pick her up, but John had brought this huge candy box with him, something that he typically did not do. And when Karen opened this box, there wasn't any candy inside. Instead, there was a black velvet box. And inside that black box was a large, pear-shaped diamond ring. John asked Karen to marry him. And of course, she said yes. They had a huge, blowout, elaborate, and very expensive wedding in a church. All of the guests wore expensive cocktail dresses, fur coats, ornate jewelry. I mean, it was the perfect night for them. I'm not sure whether John went to college or not, but he did work at his family's company after his graduation and his wedding. The pay was good enough for John and Karen to have a very expensive lifestyle as well. They lived in Orange County, they constantly went to cocktail parties, expensive dinners, and they really spent money on whatever they wanted. Eventually, Karen became pregnant, and she gave birth to a daughter named Tamara Ray. John was over the moon about this, and when Tamara was young, he would walk around with her on his shoulders. He just loved being a father, loved being a girl dad. He was so excited. But you guys know that I wouldn't be telling this story if everything actually was perfect between John and Karen. There's always something else beneath the surface. And John was actually struggling financially, even with that big salary that he was getting at the family business. It wasn't because he was spending beyond his means or not saving right or anything like that. It was because sometimes his ambition got the best of him. See, John had all of these huge ideas, but he couldn't make them into a reality. So he ended up spending money on all these different business ventures that really ended up failing. And this put his family under a lot of strain financially. Then, starting in the early 70s, John got to spending less and less time at home. He wouldn't tell Karen where he was going, what he was doing, when he would be back. And the more as time went on, he got in this habit of staying out later and later. So Karen was pretty sure that John was cheating on her, right? Plus, she was sick and tired of staying up late waiting for him and taking care of their daughter all by herself. So in 1974, she filed for divorce. Now, it took a few years for the divorce to become official, and I'm not sure why. The information out there isn't especially clear. But I do know that in 1977, John was charged with domestic assault against Karen. In that same year, he was also charged with violating price-fixing laws. Now, again, there is very little information I can find about this, but let's just say John was getting into some legal hot water. But eventually, the divorce became official, and Karen won custody over their daughter, Tamara. 4 years later, in 1978, John married for a second time. He and his wife ended up having 2 children together. The oldest was a girl named Ashley, and the youngest was a boy named John Tyler Jr. Now, for clarity, I'm going to refer to the son as John Tyler, and I'm going to keep calling the dad John, just to make it a little bit easier to tell them apart. So John had his new wife and new children, but otherwise things were pretty much the same for him. He was still an ambitious guy with big ideas, but they just never seemed to pan out. And it was getting to a point where it wasn't just hurting him financially, but it was also hurting his reputation too. People were getting to see him as unreliable and also not very smart. He talked a big game, but when it came down to it, he didn't have much business sense at all. On top of that, he had a massive ego. He could never admit when he was wrong, which might be why he kept making the same mistakes over and over and over again. It's hard to learn when you can't admit that you don't already know everything, right? So whenever a business would fail, John would put all of the blame on the other people that he was working with. He would never take any responsibility for himself, and it caused a lot of tension with his business partners. Eventually, the relationships all blew up in this big, dramatic way, and it felt like everyone that John worked with came away not trusting him. Frankly, they actually despised him, and they wanted nothing to do with him. In terms of business, John was running out of options. That is until 1981, when his dad, Buddy, suddenly passed away from a heart attack. Now, while this loss was devastating for John, it provided him with another opportunity. That family business, Modern Hancock Industries, because they now needed a CEO, somebody to run the company. Eventually, they decided to let John take over, even though a bunch of his relatives definitely didn't think that he was up to the job because of his track record. And they ended up being right, too, because John was a terrible CEO. As soon as he took over the company just headed in a really bad direction. If they had continued to let John be in charge, he probably would have made them go bankrupt. So they fired him before it could even get to that point. And his mom, Helen, ended up taking over as CEO. Now, John and Helen had always had a difficult relationship. John's family in general was always very focused on success. From a very young age, it was drilled into John's head that the most important thing in life was to make a lot of money. So Helen was particularly hard on John and held him to very high standards. When he failed the company, he failed her in turn. He failed their family. So once again, John tried blaming his feelings about this, though, onto other people. But his mom, Helen, no, she wasn't buying it. She got to be extremely upset with John, and it put a big strain on their relationship. They even cut ties with one another. So shortly after that, John started a telephone company. This was called the American Communications Network of Newport Beach. And in a really exciting change of pace, the company did extremely well. John was making a lot of money, and his life became even more luxurious, if you can imagine. He went on expensive vacations, he bought expensive cars, and it was all thanks to this new trick that John had learned, his secret to success. And that trick was committing fraud. That's right. As it turns out, John's company wasn't actually successful at all. It turns out that from 1983 to 1985, John got about $2.5 million in loans from 4 different banks and all other kinds of lenders. He said that this money was for new business equipment, but it wasn't. It was actually just for him. It was how he kept up his expensive, new lavish lifestyle. Then he didn't pay back these loans. I mean, how could he? He wasn't making any actual money. So instead, he filed for bankruptcy in 1985. Then he moved to another expensive neighborhood, though. Aspen, Colorado. And there he made a new name for himself as this wealthy, established businessman. He claimed to have a consulting business called Aspen Lifestyles, Inc. And in 1987, he even rented out a nightclub and threw himself this huge, massive, over-the-top 40th birthday party with over 300 people in attendance. But this was a huge mistake because there are different law enforcement agencies that watch out for exactly this type of thing. If you file for bankruptcy and then you turn around and you just start spending money like it's, going out of style, somebody is eventually going to notice, right? And they are going to ask questions. So an investigation uncovered the fact that John had lied to all 4 of those companies that gave him those loans. He was arrested and he was charged with fraud, and he was now potentially facing up to 15 years in prison. Now, John tried to delay his trial as much as possible. Among other things, he tried to convince a federal judge that he had this new business venture that would make him enough money to pay back all of these loans. But obviously, the judge wasn't falling for it, and his trial was set for the spring of 1988. John ended up pleading guilty and admitted to using this false information to obtain the loans. And according to the LA Times, during his sentencing, John pleaded with the judge and said, "It appears I have caused a great deal of problems and pain for a lot of people. I'm very remorseful." But the judge wasn't buying what he was selling, which good for him. He even argued with John and he said, "Mr. Hancock has engaged in a massive fraud on lending institutions. The court is informed that he is an imaginative and hard-working entrepreneur. The court doesn't doubt that. Unfortunately, the information that the court has before it also indicates that he is a person who feels the ends justify whatever means are necessary to achieve it. If he can't do it by being honest, he will do it by being dishonest." So John was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and he had to pay back a whopping $1.8 million in restitution. He ended up serving his whole sentence, no time off for good behavior, and at some point during all of this, things also went south with his marriage, and he got a divorce. His ex-wife got full custody of their kids, Ashley and John Tyler, and John rarely saw them. His relationship with them at this point was almost non-existent. So picture a guy with no job, no wife, and now a prison record. It definitely wasn't a good place to be. And John wanted to turn his life around. He wanted to fix his reputation and get to be the sort of person who people could trust again, especially his mom. Their relationship had never healed from when he got fired and when she became the CEO of the family business. They hardly ever talked. They hardly ever saw each other. Nothing. Helen felt like John wasn't a great person, and I think that the fraud case sort of proved that, yeah? He kind of had let the whole family down. But around 1995, John decided that he really wanted to try to rekindle his relationship with his mom and his 2 children. His mom, Helen, was on board with trying to make things work, so they made a plan together. Helen and John decided to rent a house together in the lavish Lemon Heights neighborhood in Orange County. John needed a new place to live now that he was out of prison, and Helen's previous home had been damaged in an earthquake, so it was really the perfect opportunity for them to live together and really work on repairing their relationship. Now, Lemon Heights was basically the Beverly Hills of Orange County. The houses were all huge. There were these fancy mansions. The people who owned them were all millionaires. And Helen and John rented a 4,200 square foot hilltop mansion that cost them $5,000 per month. That comes out to about $10,000 a month today, adjusted for inflation. And that's a lot of money, obviously. However, I will say it's not that bad given what rent in Southern California looks like today. It's insane how expensive it is. Everybody's moving out, but anyway, I'm digressing now. So John's 2 younger children, John Tyler and Ashley, had been living with their mom, but they also decided to come live with John and Helen. They had missed a lot of years together, and John wanted to spend as much quality time with them as he could. And I'm sure that John's kids were excited about rebuilding a relationship with their dad. But they also probably just wanted to live in this super sweet, huge house. It had a pool, they had wealthy neighbors, the kids came from very wealthy families. It probably seemed really alluring, really glamorous. And this neighborhood had huge homes, horseback riding, golfing. There were a lot of celebrities that lived close by. So the kids were going to take this opportunity to live in John's new place regardless. And I think a lot of kids probably would if they had that option. And I know that this sounds like a situation where there's a lot of room for things to go wrong because all of these people who didn't really get along living together, it almost sounds like the premise of a reality TV show, one full of drama. But by 1996, things were actually going really well. The kids were getting good grades in school. They had a lot of friends. Everybody seemed to be getting along with one another pretty well. John was in a really good place with his mom, his kids, and everyone. But then everything changed on the afternoon of May 8th, 1996. A bunch of people who lived in the neighborhood noticed that a house was on fire. They called 911, and the house that they called in about was the one that John and his family was living in. When the firefighters arrived, the back of John's house was absolutely covered in flames. It was so bad that it took over 65 firefighters to put this fire out. Eventually, everything died down enough that the firefighters could go inside to check if there was anybody who needed help or if anybody was hurt, and they went through the gate that led to the backyard. The fire had spread to the backyard, and parts of the patio and the pool had also been badly burnt, and on the back patio near the pool, there was a body of an adult man. The bottom half of this body was completely burnt. Then they went into the house, and in the kitchen on the floor, there was another body. This time it was burned so badly that it was completely unrecognizable. They couldn't tell who it was or if the person was a man or a woman, but the body was pretty big, so it was clear that this was the body of an adult. The body was also near the landline phone, so it looked like this person was trying to call 911 for help right before they died. But the police had also arrived on the scene by then, and through conversations with neighbors, they discovered that 4 people lived in this house. So what about John's kids? What about the 2 kids? Firefighters had only found 2 bodies so far. Now, luckily, it was a school day, and the kids had no reason to be home, so the police assumed that the children were safe at school, so they weren't too worried. If the investigators had any questions for them, they would just wait until they came home. At first, the police couldn't tell how the 2 people that they found had died, if it was because of the fire or perhaps something else. So they sent the bodies off to the medical examiner so that they could be identified and to see what the cause of death was. Then, the medical examiner confirmed that the bodies were John Sr. and Helen Hancock. John's body didn't take too long to be identified, but Helen's was a bit more difficult because it was so badly burnt. They had to call a dentist in who used dental records to realize who she was. Arson investigators arrived on the scene pretty quickly, too. No one had seen anything during the initial walkthrough that made them think that the fire was set on purpose, but it's fairly standard for fire investigators to arrive immediately on the scene of a fire, because even if the fire started accidentally, they wanted to investigate what exactly caused it. And almost as soon as the arson investigators got there, they said that an accelerant like gasoline was used to start this fire. They also said that the accelerant, whatever it was, had been poured on the actual bodies themselves. And since it was pretty obvious that someone had set this fire on purpose and specifically tried to burn the 2 bodies, the police went straight to treating these 2 deaths as murders. A few hours after the fire started, Ashley and John Tyler got home from school. They had heard some rumors at school about a fire in their neighborhood, but neither one of them ever thought that it could actually be their house. I mean, that is until they got back and they saw all of the firefighters, the police officers, the reporters there. Now, even though the kids obviously had no idea what had been going on, the police decided to question them anyway. I guess they thought that it was possible that one of them might have actually had something to do with this. But Ashley and John Tyler both had really good alibis. They had been in school all day long. Plus, they were so shocked and so shaken up by what had happened. Their reaction seemed very real, very authentic, like they were not faking it. But even though they didn't have anything to do with the fire itself, Ashley still had some useful information to share with the police. She walked through the home with the investigators and she said that multiple pieces of computer equipment were missing. So was Ashley's car, her red Ford Mustang that had the license plate Ashley on it. So based on that, the investigators released an all-points bulletin for Ashley's car. Since it was valuable and so were those pieces of equipment from the computer, the working theory at this point was that John and Helen had died in some sort of robbery gone wrong. Somebody had broken in to steal things, ended up killing the 2 adults, then they set this fire to cover their tracks. However, their opinions changed very quickly when they were contacted by the owner of the house. Like I said, Helen and John just rented the house. They didn't own it. When the house caught fire, the owner got in contact with the police, and he said that he had actually been at that place about a week earlier because John said that the front door needed to be replaced. And when the owner asked John what the problem was with this door, John said that it was because the police had kicked the door down. Apparently, he was being investigated for credit card fraud. So detectives had gotten a search warrant, they barged right in, and they had damaged the door in the process. So as it turned out, John hadn't suddenly just become successful again after being released from prison. He had taken the little bit of money that he had left and he had invested it in a condo complex and a wastewater treatment project in Parker, Arizona. And they were tied together in a very shady way. The wastewater project was trying to get all homes in the area hooked up to the city's sewage system. A lot of them had been on septic before that point, but the project wasn't going as planned. See, John was losing money, so he decided to try and sell his investment for 3 times more than it was actually worth. Now, no surprise, John couldn't find anyone who was willing to buy on those terms, but he found another way to make his money back. It turned out that the condo complexes that he owned were using septic tanks, which violated some clean water law. So he sent letters to all of his residents saying that they needed to pay to be hooked up to the new city sewage system, or they'd face some sort of consequence. It's unclear what that consequence was. But basically, he bullied his tenants into paying up and giving their business to his company. On top of that, a bunch of his tenants came forward and said that John had actually stolen money from them. He refused to give them back any of their deposits, and what's even worse is that when the tenants originally signed the lease and placed that deposit, they had to give John their credit card information, which he had then apparently used to make large personal purchases for himself. One tenant even learned that John had used his name and social security number to open up a credit card. And then he ran up more than $40,000 worth of credit card debt. I am talking shady, shady stuff. So 2 weeks before the fire, John was being investigated for credit card fraud, which could have given somebody a motive to want to hurt him and burn down his house, right? Maybe one of the people that he had scammed was trying to get a bit of revenge. But then more information came to light the day after the fire. This is when the autopsy results came out, and everybody learned how John and Helen had died. See, they were both riddled with bullets, and they had even been strangled before the house even caught on fire. So basically, somebody had shot them with a .38 caliber gun, then suffocated them. This was all around 12:30 p.m. Then they lit the fire. So now the police had confirmation of what they had suspected before. This was definitely a murder and not some sort of like freak accident. They questioned John's kids again because of this. And Ashley now said that the day before the fire, so Tuesday, May 7th, they had a pretty scary situation. John had been dating this woman named Tanika Thompson, or Ty for short. And Ashley said that Ty was over at the house that day. It was a little unusual for her to be there, though, because Ty had only been at the house once or twice before this. Ashley didn't know much about her at all. She just knew that Ty was a friend of Kim, John's ex-girlfriend. Anyway, Ty and John got into a huge argument. Ashley and her brother, John Tyler, couldn't hear everything that they were saying, but the fight did seem to be about money. Basically, the woman was asking John for money, and he refused to give her any. The woman said that she needed it because she and her mom were about to be evicted. And John basically didn't care. He acted like, this ain't my problem. You're about to lose your home. Get out of here. Like, I'm not giving you any of my money. But then the woman pulled out a gun. She aimed it at John and she threatened to shoot him if he didn't give her the money. But Ashley said that her dad stayed very calm, even when he had this gun pointed at him. He just calmly took this gun away from the woman, took out the bullets, and then handed it back to her. Then, John told his daughter Ashley to drive Ty to the bank, withdraw $200 from his account for her, and then drive her home. Ashley was really confused by all of this, but she did what her dad told her to do. After she got back home, Ashley said that she went up to her dad, that she was freaking out, asking what the hell just happened, what's going on, but that John just played it off like it wasn't that big of a deal. And he just said that Ty needed some money for a trip to South America. He didn't seem scared, he didn't seem worried, which was apparently a huge mistake because literally by the very next day he was dead. So investigators split into 2 small groups. And on May 9th, one group went to find his ex-girlfriend Kim Wakefield, while the other group went to find Ty. And remember, because Ashley mentioned that the 2 women were friends and had both dated John, it seemed important to question both of them. Kim's apartment was in Anaheim, in a neighborhood that was very different from the one where John lived. This neighborhood was run down, it was old, it was a little bit sketchy, and when they knocked on Kim's door, she answered and let them in right away. Kim was a young, beautiful woman, only 27 years old, which made her more than 20 years younger than her ex John. She lived with her young daughter. She was an aspiring painter, even though she wasn't making a living at it yet. Instead, she paid her bills by working as a dancer at a local strip club. And this is exactly where she met John in 1995. He was a regular at the club, and he was very, very generous with his money. So in Kim's mind, John clearly had this big ego and wanted to impress people with how much cash he had. And since John was there all the time, they started to get to know each other pretty well. Eventually, they began dating. But according to Kim, it wasn't anything serious, and in fact, if she was being honest, she mostly dated John for his money. He helped her with rent, even bought some of her paintings. She would spend some time at his house and he would spend some time at hers. However, Kim said that John wanted to take their relationship to the next level. He said that he had deep feelings for Kim and he wanted something more serious. He bought her presents, he wrote her numerous letters declaring his undying love for her, but she kept telling John that she did not want a serious relationship. She wasn't interested in him like that, and she wanted to keep things casual like they had been doing. Basically, they got caught in this huge back and forth. Kim was really clear about the fact that she didn't want to make a big commitment, but John kept pushing for more, ignoring everything that she was saying to him. So eventually it got to be too much for Kim and she broke it off with him. But it sounds like John just could not take no for an answer and he kept pestering her. She even suspected that he had hired people to follow her around and watch her, even though she couldn't quite prove it. Specifically, Kim thought that John had hired her neighbor, 19-year-old Tanika Thompson, the same person that Ashley had said had pointed the gun at her father the day before the house fire. Kim thought that he hired that young girl to follow her. Now, Ty lived with her mother in that same apartment complex as Kim. And before all of the drama with John, Ty and Kim had developed a very close relationship. Kim was almost like her older sister. Remember, 27, 19. Ty would babysit Kim's younger daughter. She would come over to Kim's apartment to use her phone. They were developing a friendship. They were so close, as a matter of fact, that a lot of the time, Ty just walked into Kim's apartment without even knocking or waiting for permission. She was able to do it because Kim usually kept the front door unlocked while she was home. And Kim didn't mind because they were just that close. They were good friends. And that's actually how Ty ended up meeting John, just by walking into Kim's apartment one day. One day, John was at Kim's apartment to buy one of her paintings and to give her money for rent. They were still dating at the time, but it was towards the end of their relationship. And while he was giving the money to Kim, Ty walked inside the apartment, right through the front door. She saw how much money John was giving to Kim, and right away, she seemed interested in him. So Kim introduced them to each other, and in no time, John started dating Ty. Now, at this point, he was 49 years old, and she was 19 years old. So, again, it wasn't like a true love match or anything like that. It was definitely more of like a sugar daddy, sugar baby situation. And Ty took full advantage of her relationship with John, and she talked about him with Kim constantly. Kim said that Ty was so obsessed with how much money John had, and that she just went on and would talk about it nonstop. She would also show up at the apartment complex with these large wads of cash, new clothes, other really nice gifts. She even drove John's car around. So after Kim ended her relationship with John, Ty started going to Kim's apartment more and more, which is all perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with being excited about your new rich boyfriend or with having him come over, but something about the way that Ty was acting just felt off to Kim. It really seemed like Ty was trying to make her jealous. And Kim wondered if John was encouraging her to act that way. Basically, if he was like goading Ty into doing all of this in the hopes that it would make Kim decide that she wanted to be back with him. She wanted to be with him after all. Plus, Kim would just see Ty everywhere that she went. It was like Ty was following her. And Kim figured that John was paying her to do exactly that. Eventually, it became so bad that Kim completely cut off any communication with Ty. It sucked because they had been so close before then, but she felt like she just couldn't trust Ty anymore. So that, on top of Ashley's story about seeing Ty pointing a gun at John, it really had her looking pretty suspicious. But when the police got to her apartment to try and question her, she wasn't home. Her mom was, though, and she was very open to talking with the police. She let them come inside and said that she had no idea where Ty was at the moment, and she didn't know when she was going to be home. She also said that Ty was a good girl. She had just graduated high school the year before. She had been working at different cashier jobs. She was a good, straight-laced girl. Ty's mom said that she was sweet, nice, always helpful, and that she had a boyfriend who's named Dana Warren. Now, I did a little digging online, and it looks like Dana and Ty might have even had a baby together, but it's hard to say for sure if that's true or not. But of course, Dana is not the boyfriend John. Now, of course, the police were also really interested in hearing about this whole gun situation. So they asked Ty's mom if she owned a weapon, and she said yes. She owned a .38 caliber, which she kept in a locked case in her bedroom. So then, the detectives asked if they could search the home, see if they could find the gun. She showed them the gun case, opened it, and apparently that was the very first time that she realized that there was no gun inside. Of course, though, the investigators had a pretty good idea of where it was, with Ty, wherever Ty was. I mean, the details were just stacking up against her, right? She had apparently appeared at John's home with a gun the day before the fire, and John and Helen were shot. Ty's mom owned a gun, and now that gun was missing. Investigators knew that they had to find Ty, and they needed to find her right away. Now, the good news is they didn't have to search all that hard because Ty was the one who got in touch with them. She called them and agreed to meet at the police station for questioning. And there, Ty told them all about her relationship with John. She was very cooperative the whole time. And the story that she told was pretty similar to what Kim had already said. Ty said that she and John weren't an official couple, that he mostly just gave her money to spy on Kim. She said the last time that she saw John was on Monday, May 6th, which was the day before Ashley said she saw Ty at their house. That was Tuesday, May 7th. So the investigators asked Ty, hey, are you sure that it was Monday? And she was very insistent that it was. They then asked her if she brought that gun to the meeting, and she said no, she didn't even know where she could get a gun. They then asked if she knew that her mom owned a gun, but she said, no, I have no idea. I had no idea she owned a gun. The police were suspicious, and Ty did not help her case when the interrogation was almost over, and she then just suddenly remembered all of these details that she brought up completely out of nowhere. First, she said that Kim was currently dating a cop, and he had a gun, so they needed to look closer at Kim. Then, Ty said that John sexually harmed her, and that he also harmed his daughter, Ashley. It kind of sounded like she was just trying to point the finger and throw suspicion anywhere that is but herself, but the police wanted to do their due diligence, and they followed up on every lead. So they interviewed Kim again, and also her boyfriend, but nothing suspicious or important came out of those conversations. They also talked to his daughter Ashley again, and she was like, absolutely not, those allegations aren't even close to being true. She said that her dad never laid a finger on her. Then, a few days later on May 13th, the Long Beach Police Department contacted the Orange County Police Department. You'll remember that Ashley's red Mustang had been missing ever since the fire. Well, some police in Long Beach had found a car that matched the description, and it was abandoned on the side of the road. It didn't have the Ashley license plate on it, but the police still managed to confirm that it was Ashley's car. It also had some of that computer equipment that had been missing from the home. Some crime scene investigators pulled a few fingerprints, but nothing else that was really helpful or relevant. When the police looked at the prints to see who they belonged to, they weren't Ty's. They also weren't Karen's. They belonged to a man named Jose Mendez. But as it turns out, Jose was actually a friend of Ty's. When the police questioned him, he said Ty had contacted him and asked him if he wanted to buy the car from her. So they met up, he looked it over, and then Ty told him that it was John's car. Jose didn't know John, but he had seen the news and knew all about how John had been murdered in his house and how the whole thing burned down. So there was no good reason for Ty to have his car, and Jose knew that this was not a good situation at all. So he said, nope, I don't want to buy it after all. But this was one more piece of the puzzle that was now coming together in a way that made Ty look very, very guilty. Then another person came forward with very important information. It was a landscaper who had been doing work in the Lemon Heights neighborhood on the day of the house fire. He said that he was at a nearby home when he suddenly heard multiple popping noises that sounded like gunshots. Then, a little while later, he started to smell smoke. A few minutes after that, he saw a woman who matched Ty's description come outside of the home, get into the Ford Mustang, and drive away. At first, he didn't think anything about it. Maybe she lived there or had been visiting John and now she was leaving to get away from the fire. But when he saw a news report about the murder later on, he realized that he had to tell police about what he had seen. So at this point, everything was pointing to Ty. But before the police made an official arrest, they wanted to talk to one last person, Ty's boyfriend, Dana Warren. Dana was totally cooperative when they said that they wanted to question him. And then at the station, he was very clear and very firm about the fact that he had nothing to do with John and Helen's deaths. He even agreed to do a polygraph test to prove it. During the test, they asked him if he knew who killed John and Helen. He said he didn't know, but this answer was deemed inconclusive. Then he made some comments about how he knew that the car was missing and the computer equipment was in the car. Now, the police knew this already. They had already found the car with the computer equipment in it, but that information had not yet been released to the public. So clearly, if Dana knew that, he had to be involved. How else would he know? Still, when the police pointed out that he had slipped up and sort of, incriminated himself, he just kept saying that he was totally innocent, that he didn't know anything. And I guess he could tell that he was now getting in some hot water, though, because eventually Dana agreed to help the police with a sting operation. He was going to wear a wire, and he was going to tell Ty to meet him somewhere. Then he would ask her about John and Helen's murders and try to trick her into confessing to him. So on Friday, May 24th, Dana and Ty agreed to meet up at a local parking lot. Dana drove there, and a few police officers parked in a camper in a different parking lot nearby. After Dana got there, he saw Ty come out of a store like she had been shopping while she was waiting for him. She walked up to his car, got in the passenger seat, and Dana started asking her about John. He said that he was worried and he had suspicions that she might have been involved in some sort of way. Maybe if she admitted to what she had done, he could help her somehow, help her cover it up, help her get away with it. And Ty took the bait. Eventually, Ty admitted that she was the one who had killed John. She needed money from him, and he wasn't giving it to her because she wasn't having sex with him. And she was so angry with this, and she wanted revenge, so she came up with the perfect plan. The perfect plan, of course, that wasn't actually all that perfect, because in reality, it made no sense. But she said since John wouldn't give her the money, she'd get the money herself by robbing him. But that wasn't enough. She was so angry that she had to kill him. Also kill Helen because she was a witness. Then she set the house on fire to hide any evidence. She said a friend had dropped her off at John's house that day. She went inside and got into a big fight with John. She pulled a gun just like she had the day before, but this time around, John wasn't nearly so calm. He turned, he ran away out to the pool area, and that's where Ty shot him. Once Ty knew that John was dead, she went inside, so knowing that she had to do the same thing to Helen. She hadn't originally been planning on killing her, but Ty knew that Helen was home and that she could tell the police that she was at the scene of the crime. So now she had to get rid of the witness. Afterward, Ty found some gasoline and poured it on both bodies and some other parts of the house. She even poured a bunch of gas on the bed that she and John used to have sex on. She stole some stuff that she wanted, she put it all in the Mustang, she lit the house on fire, and then she booked it out of there. Now this confession was all that the police needed. So they ran over to Dana's car, Ty got out, and she was immediately arrested. They also made a show of arresting Dana because they didn't want Ty to figure out that he was the one who was helping them. Ty was charged with arson, burglary, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was denied bond and pleaded not guilty, but her trial wouldn't start for another few years. While she was waiting for her trial, Ty met another inmate named Dane Sunter, and while they were in jail, they became very close friends. Dane was going to be released soon, and I guess that Ty saw an opportunity in that. Maybe she could ask her to help her out by getting revenge on Dana and Kim, something like that. And I guess by this point, she figured out that Dana had cooperated with the police and gotten her arrested, but I'm not sure why she'd be so pissed at Kim. But, I mean, I guess we're talking about somebody who had already killed 2 people for incredibly petty reasons, so clearly she wasn't the most logical thinker. But in any event, they made a plan that Dane was going to find Kim and attack her. But this ended up not working out at all because during a routine search of the cell, corrections officers found a map of where Kim lived and multiple letters from Ty talking about how they were going to force some sort of confession out of Kim and then attack Dana. So Ty was now also being charged with conspiracy on top of all of the other charges. Her trial was set to start in early 1999 and she was facing the death penalty. Now, I know that this is true almost any time we talk about the death penalty, but in this case, especially, there was a lot of controversy. Basically, a lot of people thought that she was really young, that she didn't deserve the death penalty, even though what she did was horrible, so there was a lot of division in this. And then on Wednesday, April 28th, the trial officially began. And Ty completely shocked everyone, because for years at this point, she had been claiming that she wasn't guilty, she was innocent, and she had attorneys that had been building a case for her for months. But now, on the very first day of her trial, Ty stood up and pleaded guilty. It was all part of a deal to avoid the death penalty, and as part of the terms, Ty had to read a confession in court. And this is what her confession read. In Orange County on May 8, 1996, I intentionally killed John and Helen Hancock with a .38 handgun. These 2 murders took place during the commission of robbery and burglary and are murders of the first degree. I also set fire to the residence of the Hancocks in Orange County immediately after the murders. During the month of June 1996, while housed in the Orange County Jail, I conspired with inmate Dame Sutton to assault Dana Warren with force likely to cause great bodily injury. So Ty was sentenced to serve 2 concurrent life sentences and will be in jail for the rest of her life. And she actually has a profile on a jail pen pal page. And I'm going to read you her About Me section because it is so cringe. My name is Tanika Ty Thompson. I am a single black female that's full of energy with a very positive attitude. I'm 40 years young, 135 pounds, thick legs, and nice, well, you can imagine. I've got nice brown eyes with a full mouth made to kiss. I do my best to surround myself with positive people, and I am very far from the simple-minded people that are around. I love meeting new people who are like-minded, seeking friendship with a beautiful mind, loyal, trustworthy, intelligent man. Race, age, and size is not important. I'm attracted to what's in your heart. Your mind, then what's on the outside. I'm extremely adventurous, outgoing, always open to new experiences. I love to dance, cook, read, and watch the movies. I am very well-rounded in all ways. I love football and basketball, but most of all, I love to laugh. Remember that the most flawless diamonds in the world come from having to ensure the greatest pleasures. I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon. Which I just gotta say, I think it's not only cringe the way she's describing herself, but how she's boasting that she's so much better than everybody else and she wants like-minded people. You're the one in jail, girl, for murdering 2 people. And you have such a lack of remorse. What's happening? What's happening? Now, in 2019, Ty filed an appeal to her sentence. However, that appeal was denied in 2020 and her original sentence was upheld. Now, John's 2 children, Ashley and John Tyler, went on to live with their mother after everything happened. And this is where my sister comes into it. John Tyler was Amy's good, dear friend. And so he wasn't the John Sr., the fraud committing crazy guy, but John Tyler, his son. And how I mentioned earlier, how John Tyler was very specific about who told this story because it was his childhood. It's everything he endured. It's what his life was. And tragically, John Tyler is no longer with us. And I'm going to let my sister explain a little bit about that. It's not my place, I don't want to say it's not my place, but I'm just going to allow her to explain that. But the reason that she felt it was so important that we share this story is because it's a reminder of the impact that our actions can have on other people. Because John Tyler had to deal with his dad, who was a fraudster, arguably a narcissist, somebody who used money to gain ego and support his ego. And it affected John Tyler deeply, not only because of the actions his father had done and his dad being in prison, but then of course, his dad's horrific murder because of greed and wealth and all of that as well, and the murder of his grandmother. But again, let me let Amy jump on here to share a little bit about John Tyler because he is no longer with us, and I'll let her jump on. But before I do that too, I just want to say, even though John Sr. wasn't the greatest guy by any stretch, his story does deserve to still be told because at the end of the day, he was senselessly murdered over money, over greed. And his mom, Helen, just murdered for being just a casualty because she was a bystander, a witness. It is so, so senseless. And that also now, like I said, has the ripple effect and affects other people. So Amy's going to jump on right now and she's going to share with you a little bit about John Tyler.
I'm so grateful that Annie has this platform to be able to cover this case, as it's one that's been very close to my heart for many years. John Tyler was a very close friend of mine and unfortunately passed away a little over 10 years ago. And it's upsetting to me that when you search online for him, most of the stuff that comes up is of his father rather than him. So I wanted to just take a quick moment and just let you know who John Tyler was, because he was an amazing friend to me. He was always my biggest cheerleader. He would send me cards when there were big milestones in my life, despite sometimes him struggling himself. We worked together for a little over 10 years in the beauty industry. We were working side by side in a corporate office, and it was a very small office. So oftentimes it would just be he and I working all day together. And we really developed just this very close brother and sister like friendship and would joke around all the time. And in most of those years, he never had shared his story. I never knew other than he had lost a parent. And one day he decided to confide in me and told me what had happened, which was obviously very heartbreaking and hard to hear. And I know that John struggled with the aftermath of all of that for well into his adult years. So this can just serve as a reminder that these types of crimes and acts don't just affect those directly involved, but it's a ripple effect and deeply affects the family and friends surrounding them. And I know that was true for John, and while he's not here to share his story, I'm very thankful that Annie was, and I know that he would have been proud in the way that it was covered. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off as Annie always would, and thank you for tuning in. And until next time, stay safe.
All right, guys, and before you go, don't forget to go check out Scentbird. Use my code AnnieElise2 for 55% off, making your first month only $8.